Hablamos después.
Great. There are more seats down in front if you'd like to come and sit. Wonderful. Welcome. My name is Cindy Arnson. I'm director of the Latin American program here at the Wilson Center, and we are honored to join with the Inter-American Dialogue, my friend Michael Shifter, in hosting Chilean Foreign Minister Dr. Heraldo Muñoz. I'd like to extend a warm word of welcome as well to Chile's new ambassador to the United States, Juan Gabriel Valdez, as well as to the Vice Minister of Commerce, Andrés Rebolledo, and to Senator Alonso de Uresti, who are also joining us as part of the minister's delegation. I'd also like to extend a welcome to the representatives of some 12 or 13 embassies that are joining us today from Canada, China, Colombia, Ecuador, El Salvador, France, Germany, Mexico, Nicaragua, Peru, I believe the ambassador is here, if I'm not mistaken, the Russian Federation, Suriname, Spain, and Venezuela. Chile is known in this hemisphere as a country that has combined strong economic growth with strong social policies to ensure equity. Several reforms to deepen social inclusion are underway, but Chile has already done much better than most other countries in Latin America on a number of fronts. It has the highest Human Development Index in the region, the lowest homicide rate in all of Latin America, something like 99% literacy, and equally high marks on indicators of competitiveness and transparency. We know that much remains to be done, but these accomplishments nonetheless speak for themselves. Chile also has a dynamic and changing foreign policy based in the commercial sphere on free trade agreements. If I'm not wrong, I think Chile is one of the countries that has more bilateral free trade agreements than any other country in the world. On new forms of economic and political integration, witness the Pacific Alliance, as well as a turn towards other countries in South America. We are privileged to have Foreign Minister Muñoz to address these issues. Heraldo is no stranger to this city, to many in this room, to many in this country, or to the global audience that is joining us via webcast. He has been a leading figure in Chile's return to democracy and in his country's foreign relations. In the 1980s, he served as a member of the executive committee of the No campaign that defeated General Pinochet in a 1988 plebiscite. And we were just speaking with Wilson Center Director Jane Harmon, who in 1990 accompanied a National Democratic Institute delegation in observing the Chilean elections that took that country back to democracy. Following the 1990 elections, Heraldo has served in just about every important post a diplomat could conceive of, as ambassador to the Organization of American States, as cabinet secretary to President Ricardo Lagos, as deputy foreign minister, as ambassador to Brazil, ambassador to the United Nations, including a stint as president of the UN Security Council, and most recently, prior to his appointment as foreign minister, as director for Latin America and the Caribbean of the United Nations Development Program. He is a prolific author and editor of seminal books on foreign relations, on security, democracy, and human rights, including some that I read as a graduate student. And I'm pleased that some years ago, along with the Inter-American Dialogue, we featured a discussion of his gripping memoir, The Dictator's Shadow. Heraldo's latest book is Getting Away with Murder, The Assassination of Benazir Bhutto and the Politics of Pakistan, stemming from the time that he spent at the UN as chairman of the Commission of Inquiry into the assassination of the former Pakistani Prime Minister, Benazir Bhutto. Heraldo also has a PhD in international studies from the Korbel School at the University of Denver, as well as a diploma in international relations from the Catholic University of Chile. But before turning the microphone over to our speaker, I'd first like to recognize Andrew Seeley, Vice President of the Wilson Center, who joins us in the audience, as well as the staff of the Embassy of Chile, who have worked so hard, and of the Foreign Ministry, who've worked so hard to bring this event to fruition, as well as our own staff members, Veronica Colon, Catherine Moffat, and Angela Bodzitsky, both staff and interns with the Latin American program, without whom we would not be here today. So without further ado, Heraldo, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Michael, both to the Wilson Center and the Inter-American Dialogue for inviting me to speak about Chile's new foreign policy, even though I'm tempted to speak about domestic politics in Chile, because we're experimenting exciting times. I was just in Congress speaking with some members of the U.S. Congress, and I was explaining the reforms that Chile is putting into place with regard to education, tax reform, and political reform, beginning with doing away with the binominal electoral system. And I said it's a heavy agenda. And the members of Congress said this is so rare that politicians actually do what they said they would do during the campaign. That's what's happening in Chile right now. The President, Michelle Bachelet, is honoring what she promised in the campaign by introducing changes that should make Chile, hopefully, a more just, a more egalitarian country with a higher quality education, with public education, non-profit, and finance those reforms as it should be. So, but let me speak about the foreign relations, which are also exciting moments right now. Let me also thank all of you who are here. In my delegation is also Ambassador Juan Pablo Lira, our ambassador to the OAS. I thank many of the friends that I see, faces that I've known for quite a while. And I thank you especially because I know that you're leaving aside the game between Brazil and Mexico to hear me. So it is a high honor that you've chosen to be here. Let me begin by saying that Chile's foreign policy will have elements of a continuity and some elements of change. Continuity because foreign policy in Chile has always been state policy, where differences between government and opposition don't exist. And I would have to begin by saying that there are principles that are absolutely essential, that have always informed Chile's foreign policy, that will continue to be so during this administration. First of all, respect for international law and treaties. Second, peaceful resolution of conflicts. Third, the recognition of the principle of sovereignty and autonomy. Third, the independence of states. Fourth, territorial integrity. Fifth, the commitment to democracy and human rights. Finally, the principle that it is our responsibility to cooperate. Those are some of the elements that have always existed, that will continue to be so. So those are strong elements of continuity. But there will be change. And perhaps I would say that the biggest change would be in a very strong commitment to Latin America and the Caribbean. A commitment to integration, a commitment to an integration that is all-inclusive within the region, independently of the differences. We know that there are differences with regard to how to advance towards development in the region. Despite those differences, we feel that we can build bridges over that variety of views, both political and economic, so that we have put forward the concept that Chile would like to have convergence with diversity, which is going well beyond what it used to be in the past, open regionalism. This is something else I'll try to explain. The idea then is that our natural space is Latin America, and particularly South America. That's where our main and primary interests are, and where Chile would like to project itself to the world from what we are. We are Latin Americans. This is the nature of our condition, and this will inform our international insertion. As I said, our region is diverse, but we feel that we should pursue a foreign policy that would be pragmatic and devoid of ideological prejudices. And we will attempt to do that, and we have done so in this 3 months or so that we've been in office. Chile's role will aim at building bridges of understanding over the differences so that the region can face the world as united as possible. We are realistic. Realpolitik is something that is in the blood of Chilean diplomats, and I'm no different than any of the policymakers in Chile with this regard. But at the same time, we feel that there's a lot more to be done in terms of seeking, as I mentioned, a convergence in diversity. Thus, we will strengthen our participation in the regional integration mechanisms such as UNASUR and CELAC. We will continue to be active in the Pacific Alliance. I participated recently in the meeting of foreign ministers of the Alliance, meeting of foreign ministers and ministers of trade, and I reiterated the commitment that Chile will have within the Pacific Alliance. Understanding that the Pacific Alliance is an economic integration scheme and a platform for projection of the region towards Asia and the Pacific. That is the merit of the Pacific Alliance, and it should not be construed or changed into something that is not. This is not a political alliance. This is an economic integration scheme, and we're very committed to that. In fact, from here, I'm going to Mexico, where I will join the president at the summit, presidential summit of the Pacific Alliance, and she made sure to be there to underline the commitment that we have with the alliance in this perspective I just mentioned. But we feel that integration in the region should not exclude anybody. We should not have a division between the Pacific and the Atlantic side of the region, particularly South America, because our own interests lie in the Pacific Alliance, but also in the Atlantic. We have neighbors that are extremely important to us. Chile would aim at being a bridge to the Pacific through our ports, through our territory. If we're to be a bridge, we have to be a bridge for someone. We have to be a bridge for Brazil, for Argentina, for Uruguay, for Paraguay, for the countries that are interested, in fact, in projecting themselves toward this horizon of the future, which is the Asia-Pacific region. So our vision is to be, as I mentioned, to continue to be active in the Pacific Alliance, understanding that it should not be an excluding or antagonistic integration scheme vis-a-vis other integration projects in which we participate. In fact, Chile is an associate associate member of Mercosur. So we will attempt degrees of convergence between the Pacific Alliance and other integration schemes. The first step already took place in May when the ABAC, which is the mechanism of cooperation among business people of the APEC, met in Chile. And I invited the foreign minister of Brazil and the foreign minister of Argentina, and they happily accepted, and we had a luncheon presided by President Michelle Bachelet and 170 business people from the Asia-Pacific region, including the CEO of the largest Chinese company that, I can't remember the figure, I think he said that they sell something like $86 billion a year. So that it was very interesting as we had a dialogue between the three foreign ministers that was highly interesting for those entrepreneurs. So that was a step, but a further step took place when we had this meeting of foreign ministers and ministers of trade of the Pacific Alliance, when I proposed that we meet the Pacific Alliance with Mercosur to seek areas of convergence, understanding that today Probably in terms of reduction of customs duties or regulation would be very difficult between the two, given the differences that exist, and given the fact that the Pacific Alliance agreed in February to reduce 92% of all exchange of goods. But we feel that there is the possibility of convergence in specific areas, and we presented a small paper with that regard. Facilitation of trade, electronic commerce, exchanges with regard to student scholarships, cooperation in the area of science and technology, phytosanitary measures, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, tourism, even issues with regard to integration of infrastructure, so that there are areas where we can advance in a realistic, gradual, and complementary way. Our idea is not to change the nature of the Pacific Alliance by advocating that others come in. Those that come in will be those that want to. And there are some that have applied and others are observers. Nor are we advocating a fusion of Mercosur and the Pacific Alliance. Each should maintain their own peculiarity. And we use the concept of the European Union of the different speeds, which we feel that is very interesting, because that way those structures and projects of integration that can advance faster, like the Alliance for Progress, can do so. The other ones can advance at their own rhythm, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a conception of a regional architecture of cooperation, because that is absolutely essential if Latin America and the Caribbean is to have a louder voice in the international arena. And I give an example. Today we have a negotiation in the UN about the agenda, the post-2015 agenda. And that is advancing quite fast. This would be the agenda for the next 20, 30 years at the global level. And Latin America and the Caribbean have not gotten their act together yet, while other regions have put forth much more concerted positions with regard to their own interests. And this is a region that has more elements in common, because this region is basically a middle-income country, middle-income economies in the region, with the exception of Haiti. So that we should have a lot more elements in common, and we feel that we should have that in terms of our horizon. So what we're saying is, in the end, quite pragmatic, and as I said, conversion should be gradual and should be on elements that unite us and not that divide us. I mentioned UNASUR. We feel that this is an important element to favor convergence of regional initiatives. UNASUR has proven to be effective in some areas, ineffective in others. We have had the problem that we haven't had a Secretary General functioning in the past. After the death of Nestor Kirchner, the situation became particularly sensitive in that regard. But on the other hand, UNASUR has played, let us say, a constructive role with regard to the crisis in Venezuela. The issue of UNASUR in Venezuela was posed in Santiago during the inauguration of President Michelle Bachelet on the 11th of March. I hadn't assumed yet, and I was getting the request that I would organize a meeting of presidents. That wasn't possible. We organized a meeting of foreign ministers immediately after we inaugurated the new government. And at that time, I mentioned to my colleagues, we're willing to host this so long as we have a concrete outcome out of the meeting. I'm not available simply to have a declaration, because rhetoric won't help the Venezuelan people, won't help the Venezuelan government, won't help UNASUR. And we were able then to have all parties accept the idea of a mission of foreign ministers to try to favor dialogue between government and opposition. We did that. We went there, and we did a bit of sort of a shuttle diplomacy, even though we weren't shuttling, but we were moving, from one room, from one hotel to another, to meet with the opposition and with the government, trying to sit them at a table and begin a process of dialogue that would avoid the violence, the polarization that had characterized Venezuela in recent times. We were able to do that. Some advances were made, but you know that the situation today is uncertain. We hope that still UNASUR can play a role. In the end, it's not up to UNASUR, it's up to the Venezuelans. They will decide their own destiny. If they are not available to agree on a minimum set of issues, it will be very difficult that UNASUR will do it for them. It won't do it. We will accompany, we will advise, we will give our strongest opinions on what should be done, but it is up to them. But at least I see there an opportunity for UNASUR because Venezuela is of interest to all of us. And the degree of distrust that there has existed between government and opposition, of course, makes it very, very difficult. With regard to again, Latin America and as our main priority, I would say that another important point for us is that even though the economic and trade components of our foreign relations are fundamental, they are insufficient. We therefore, what we think is that we need an integral approach to the linkages with Latin America and the Caribbean. We just can't simply feel satisfied because we have free trade agreements or investment has increased with regard to neighboring countries. We have to have greater density, political density, cultural, social, and that is something that of a difference with regard to what happened in the past. And that's why the first trip that the president took abroad was a state visit to Argentina. Because it is a neighboring country, we have a long-standing relationship with them, and now we have to advance in terms of connectivity, in terms of reviving the Maipú Treaty, and addressing many issues that when we visited Argentina, both presidents gave us a list of tasks that we have to complete. No rhetoric, they said, agree on concrete outcomes with regard to tunnels, with regard to connectivity, with regard to a lot of issues, so that in August, end of August, we will have a meeting in Buenos Aires of ministers of both sides and of intendentes and gobernadores on the Chilean side and gobernadores on the Argentinian side to see about concrete issues of the agenda. The same thing with Brazil. The first meeting that I had with a foreign minister before I took on the official role of being Chile's foreign minister was with my colleague from Brazil who went to Chile on a private visit to meet with me and to discuss common issues. And in fact, he was fundamental supporting the proposal that we did on UNASUR in Venezuela. And after that, my first bilateral trip was to Brazil, and since then we've had a great exchange. Chile suggested the possibility that we could have a Brazilian diplomat in the mission of Chile at the UN while we are members of the Security Council, so that in a way we would have Brazil being indirectly sitting in the Security Council. In exchange, Brazil is delivering information on what transpires on issues relevant to the Security Council in countries where we don't have a resident mission. So that, I think, indicates the degree of trust that exists between the two countries. Doesn't depend on us. We're consulting with the U.S. State Department whether that will be possible or not. We are in a negotiation on that particular issue. And I think the other very significant signal was that President Dilma Rousseff invited President Michelle Bachelet to go to Brazil. We couldn't do it on the date that they originally indicated because we had tragedies in Chile. In 3 months we had an earthquake, actually 2 earthquakes, a major fire, the biggest fire in the history of Valparaiso, and now some flooding. That's in 3 months. So the president couldn't go, but she made it on the opening day of the World Cup. You have to love Chile a lot for the president to receive the president of Chile in Brasilia at the presidential palace, signing agreements hours before she had to go to Sao Paulo for the opening game of the World Cup. So I think these are signals that are very important. With Peru, we are trusting that we can turn the page after both accepted with a high degree of responsibility the decision of the International Court of Justice regarding the maritime limit. We've done the work to determine the coordinates in an impeccable way, both countries. Now we're looking forward to the changes that Peru has to change to its internal rules to make them compatible with the law of the sea, according to that particular decision and to the joint declaration of the 2+2, the meeting of foreign ministers and defense ministers, that signal precisely that with regard to Peru and the continuity with regard to Chile in terms of being compatible with the law of the sea convention. We hope to turn the page and to begin a constructive agenda with Peru. We have so much in common, and we are looking forward to working together. Unfortunately, in Bolivia, the case is not the same. They have actually sued Chile in the International Court of Justice, demanding no less that Chile is forced to negotiate its sovereign access to the Pacific through Chilean territory. In essence, what Bolivia is seeking as a remedy from the court is that Chile gives up territory. Evidently, no country can graciously give away territory. And we find that we are sorry about that, because Chile and President Bachelet had the best attitude to have a constructive agenda with Bolivia. And this is also very serious, because in the end, what Bolivia is seeking is the non-recognition of a border treaty that has existed for 110 years between the two countries. And that can signal juridical uncertainty with regard to border treaties that have the highest level of protection in international law. So we will defend ourselves in the court, but evidently we're willing to continue to talk with Bolivia on issues regarding integration, regarding transportation, all kinds of other issues, understanding that any matter relating with aspirations of access to the sea is now in The Hague, and that in addition, as we have said it, that Bolivia actually enjoys access to the sea. It enjoys access to the sea according to treaty, because they have customs in our ports. They enjoy free transit through our territory and ports. They have customs officials in our ports. Their cargo is not inspected. They can transport everything and anything, including armaments. We have constructed a railroad between La Paz and Arica. There's a pipeline and a facility, a maritime facility for boats to use that pipeline. They can have warehouses where they can have imports as kept for up to a year, and exports up to 60 days. No Chilean businessman enjoys that, nor anybody from a third party. Nevertheless, that is that, and we have to deal with that. And Chile will have its juridical arguments as well as any political or communicational ones. Let me just say that evidently foreign policy goes well beyond Latin America. I've spoken perhaps a lot about Latin America because this is the focus of our foreign policy. But I begin saying that beyond Latin America, the Asia-Pacific region is absolutely fundamental for us. It's the horizon of the future in the end. So that we think that the Pacific Alliance can play a big role as a bridge, as Chile wants to be a bridge and a gate to the Pacific. We have a privileged relationship with China as now our first trade partner. We're members of APEC, looking forward to going in November to Beijing. And in addition to that, in order to signal the importance of Asia-Pacific, President Bachelet has designated former President Eduardo Frei Ruiz-Tagle as a special envoy for the Asia-Pacific region, because we understand that the Asia-Pacific region rank is very important, and designating a former president as a roving ambassador, we feel that is an important signal of our interest in the Asia-Pacific region. But it's well beyond China. Our trade and political relations with other countries like Japan, like Korea. We are negotiating right now with Indonesia, a country 200 million strong, a free trade agreement. It's one of the few countries of Asia-Pacific that we don't have a free trade agreement with, so that the Asia-Pacific region will continue to be fundamental for us. The United States. The fact that I'm here is because I've been invited by Secretary John Kerry to participate as the only Latin American Caribbean foreign minister in an oceans conference, which is fundamental for Chile, evidently. And we had the opportunity to hold a bilateral to discuss issues, including what will transpire within a few days, the visit of President Michelle Bachelet, invited by President Obama. I think this is a very strong signal of the close relationship, of the mature and high-quality relationship that exists between the United States and Chile. And even though the U.S. is no longer our single most important trade partner, if you analyze the contents of the trade, you realize there's a lot of value added in the exports of Chile towards the United States. Thus, it's a very different relationship than the one that we have with China, which is commodity-based. So that's why I say that is high-quality, mature relationship. We're now focusing not only on what we can do at the federal level, but at the state level. And the agreement, the Chile-California agreement, that focuses on exchanges of education, science, technology, innovation, is fundamental for us. And we're looking forward to on another visit, because the president is coming to Washington and staying here for 2 days, meeting with the president, having meetings with entrepreneurs, and having giving some lectures, that we will be able to go to California on another time, because that agreement is very significant to us. We signed another one with Massachusetts. There's a possibility that the state of Washington, that has as important companies as Microsoft and Boeing, would be of interest to us, and also Starbucks, a great contribution to humanity, of course. So that we're looking forward to look at the state level relationship with the U.S. We're very pleased about the visa waiver, which has just been approved in the floor of the House of Deputies in Chile. Senator, the rest is here, so that we hope that the Senate will do the same thing soon, and we will have that agreement to make sure then that Chileans that come to the United States, which are about 250,000 strong a year, will benefit from a very easy access and cheap visa, electronic visa. So there are other issues on our bilateral relationship: energy, TPP. All of these issues, of course, are fundamental, and we hoped to advance on them as it should be a relationship between state and state, according to our own interests. We will advance on those issues that we feel are beneficial to Chile, that create employment, that create great opportunities. We won't do it when we see that the negatives will be higher than the positives. This is a matter of simple negotiation, and that will be the attitude that we will have. Let me just mention a couple more things before ending. South-South relations are very important. We are bent on having more cooperation to less developed countries. We already have a mechanism, the Chilean Fund to Combat Hunger and Poverty. We think that with the U.S. we can do more triangular cooperation as well, but we will do it bilateral, and we will try to increase that. The President, having been former Executive Secretary of UN Women, is very sensitive to how we can cooperate with others. And she has instructed me to do sort of an analysis of the cooperation strategy of Chile, so that we put it up to date, and we hopefully put more funds on South-South cooperation. Chile will be very active on multilateral policy. Chile has always been committed to multilateralism, and now even more so because we're members of, for 2 years, of the Security Council, so that we have to look at the great issues that are ailing the world in terms of peace and security. But we're also members of the Council on Foreign, on the Council on the Human Rights Council in Geneva, so that I think gives us a greater responsibility. In the UN Security Council, we will continue to attempt to play a constructive role in conformity with the Charter and understanding that the use of force must be the last resource. And we've always had that principled policy, and it will continue to be that, independently of what the position might be of other members of the Security Council, including the permanent members. We will guide ourselves by principle. That will be our votes, and that will be our attitude. And finally, let me just finish that saying the two issues that I think are important, particularly from a domestic perspective. Every foreign minister, when they begin, they feel that they had to modernize the foreign ministry. And when they are about to finish, they, because this work is very intense, and there's a former foreign minister here, you just don't have time to do modernization plans. So at the last minute, when administration is about to end, they sort of begin to work on a bill to send to Congress, and it never happens. So I designated on the first week that I arrived at Foreign Ministry someone to begin working on that exclusively, a former ambassador who has done an excellent job. We already have a little bit of a draft of what could be discussed now with all concerned parties, with the Association of Diplomats, with the professionals of the ministry, with Congress, with academics, with civil society, with business people that evidently participate all in foreign relations, no longer a monopoly of the foreign ministry. And at the same time, I decided to do a white book on Chilean foreign policy. We've had an experience of having done that a few years back, a white book on defense. And that was a very interesting experience, because the idea is to set up the guiding principles and guiding lines of Chile's foreign policy for the strategic perspective, independently of the nuances that every government must have in every foreign policy. And I've designated someone to work on that. And with Brazil, we're working on this because they began doing this, a white book for Brazilian foreign policy, and good ideas should be copied. So I told my colleague, the foreign minister, that I wanted to copy that good idea, and he sent up to us a person that will be working with us to set up the methodology for the drafting this white book with ample consultation in Chile. So in sum, there are elements of continuity, elements of change, and I think this is a duty for a country like Chile that has done some positive things in the past, and we have the aspiration to continue doing that under the leadership of President Bachelet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muñoz. That was terrific and very, very comprehensive. And now I know why you're traveling so much. There's a lot on your agenda. Let me just first of all say how delighted the Inter-American Dialogue is to collaborate in this event. I want to thank the Woodrow Wilson Center, the Latin American Program, Cindy Arnson, and entire staff for working together. It's really a great joy and honor to have Minister Muñoz with us. Heraldo, I met, I think, in the late 1980s in Chile when I was working at the Ford Foundation and working in Chile, and we've maintained a close association since then. There are a lot of questions that are on the table, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of good discussion. Maybe I could start with a question, if I can. Cindy mentioned that you're a very prolific author, and she cited a few of the books. One of the books that I have in my office that you also wrote, co-wrote with a very close, dear colleague of ours named Pete Vakey, who died a few years ago, was called The Future of the Organization of American States. That was the title of the book, which is a fantastic book. And I'm just wondering if you sort of had to update that book in 2014, what it might say in comparison to when you wrote it, which was, what, 20 years ago, something like that. Just curious to know your reflections about that. The second issue that occurs to me is the issue of Cuba. Which you didn't mention in your opening comments. Is this a question that you think merits kind of diplomatic efforts on the part of you and other foreign ministers in Latin America? Is this an issue that is of concern in terms of Cuba's reintegration into American system, or the fact that CELAC is working is something that is, in your view, kind of sort of takes care of that, addresses that question, or is there something more that that you think needs to be done or addressed in regard to the Cuba question? You want to take those, and then I can.
Okay. On the first question, Jose Miguel Insulza is here. So that
the World Cup must be over.
I would not. Yeah.
The World Cup is over.
Right.
Okay.
What happened?
Okay. Yeah.
What happened?
We'll discuss what happened later.
0-0. Okay.
Yeah.
0-0. Wow.
So I would say that he has had a much tougher job than when I was ambassador, because circumstances have changed. So if I had to write that book again, first of all, I wouldn't write it. You know. I have other things to do, but I would say that there are two elements that have changed. At that time, we had a very strong U.S. commitment for OAS reform, and I remember that I saw more of the Assistant Secretary of State, Bernie Aronson, than even I saw other ambassadors, because clearly the U.S. wanted reform of the OAS, and at the time we had a number of countries that were on the same idea, that clearly Chile, but also countries like Brazil, Venezuela at the time. Mexico was more reticent. It was the most reticent of all countries at the time. But nevertheless, we created, I would say, a majority of countries that wanted to confront some of the main issues, beginning with democracy, because we didn't want to go back to the coups and to the experience of the military dictatorships of the 1970s and 80s. So that in 1990, when Chile had just arrived, we were in a very favorable climate. And that's why we approved the Resolution 1080 in Santiago, then the Washington Protocol, and then that led to the Charter approved in Lima. So that, and many other changes, we fused the two main councils, one on education, the other one on science, into one. We made savings. But there was a positive climate for that, and a very strong commitment of the United States. In fact, I remember the NAFTA being launched at the OAS, the president of the United States going to the OAS, and it wasn't the radar. In fact, there were editorials of major newspapers about the importance of the OAS. That has changed today. Second, there's a lot more diversity in the region than was ever at that time. So that. And diversity, as I said before, has to be respected. Today, you have, ALBA, you have the Alliance, you have Mercosur, you have different views. You have the Central American dynamic and the Caribbean one. So that the much greater diversity, I think, makes it so that it's a lot more difficult to achieve than it was at that time. So I think those are the reasons behind the criticisms that I've read of the OIS, and that's independently of the leadership, because I think that Jose Miguel Insulza, as a Secretary General, has done everything in his power as a Secretary General. But in the end, any international organization is nothing more than the sum of the individual wills. You cannot do more than what countries are willing to do. So that, I think, is what has changed the ways. With regard to Cuba, what I perceive in the region is a very common perspective, and that is a rejection of the blockade. All countries of Latin America have normal diplomatic, political, economic, trade relations with Cuba, so that there's nothing to be done from our part. Mm-hmm. Evidently, there would be a desire or a wish, but it's not within our realm to make any pronouncement on that the U.S. policy would be different than it is. I heard at the OIS General Assembly a very loud voice of many countries saying that Cuba should be invited to the Summit of the Americas. That's a bit different from exactly the coming back to the OIS, because from what I know, from what I've heard from the Cubans, they're not in any rush to come back to the OIS at all. They're not interested, actually. But something different is if they were to be invited by the next host of the Summit of the Americas. But evidently, Chile has very normal relations with Cuba, so we have nothing more to add to that.
Great. Thank you very much. Why don't we open it up, and if people can just tell us who they are and try to be brief and make a comment or a question for Minister Muñoz. Margaret, you want to start us off, please?
Margaret, if you could wait for the microphone here. There you go.
Margaret Hayes, and good to see you again, Heraldo.
Yeah.
I knew Heraldo when he didn't have gray hair. In your presentation, Heraldo, you have focused largely on South America, which is understandable, and especially on your neighbors and then on South-South relations. Your comments on the relationship with the United States were really couched more in the bilateral framework than a regional. And so my question would be, what view in your scheme, in your vision of the future, what is your view of the U.S. role in the region? And I ask this because there's a lot of wringing of hands in this country among the political class, the academic community, and so forth, that, oh, the United States has abandoned the region, isn't paying any attention. And maybe in some ways that's true, but it's also important that countries in the region be active players in their own, the definition of their own destinies. So I would view your more active integration in UNASUR as a positive, but I would hope that that didn't exclude active and good relations with the United States. How are you seeing that?
Yeah, thank you. You want to take a few other questions, and then we'll go back to any other comments. Am I missing anybody? Yes, we have a few. Yeah, right here.
Great. Thank you, Kelly Myman with McClarty Associates. It's good to see you again. My question is with respect to the Pacific Alliance, and the grouping of the Pacific Alliance has really been, for those of us in the private sector, pretty exciting, because it doesn't involve the United States, but it does involve some initiatives to actually bring some order to all the various free trade agreements that are out there. I'd be interested in getting your views on what kind of the next wave of progress might be. I know folks have talked about regulatory coherence and making some advances in that area, maybe in the areas of technology or in health, and just would like your views on that. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. You have a question? Yeah, here.
Hi, Tomas Dingus. Quick question about energy. Chile's extremely dependent upon energy resources from outside of the country. And they just struck down, I believe, the Hidroaicén, which was going to provide a tremendous amount of power from the south of Chile by damming a couple rivers. How can you just speak at some point to either how the sort of environmental policies currently with this government could have been affecting either foreign investment or relationships with actors outside the country, which might impact energy dependence or independence in Chile? And if you've had any reaction, or if you could just speak generally as to what is the future of energy and what's the role of going forward of your relationships with other countries.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. You want to?
All right. Well, with regard to Margaret's question, I think that both things are possible. In other words, stronger Latin American relations and stronger relations or deeper relations with the U.S., at least from the Chilean perspective. I cannot speak for other Latin American countries, but we think that both things are compatible. In a global world where we have such challenges, we need to negotiate as a bloc, and that's why Latin America is so important for us. On the other hand, Chile is a country that is open to the world economy. It's a relatively small country of 17 million. We need open markets. We need all the opportunities that we can grab. And definitely relations with the U.S. is fundamental because the U.S. for us is value added. It's innovation. It's just like Europe. And I should have mentioned the European Union for us is also extremely important. We have proposed to the European Union to update the association agreement that we have already for a decade. And they have responded positively with regard to, out of the three pillars, two of them, the cooperation pillar and the political pillar. And now we're expecting consultations among them with regard to the key commercial and economic pillar. And that relationship is fundamental because, engaging with the European economies and having more cooperation is for innovation and value added for Chile is fundamental. So that we're not going to opt for one alternative at the expense of others. We feel that we have to be pragmatic on this, non-ideological on this, and make the best of the circumstances in which we are moving, so that at least we are going to pursue very actively a relationship with the United States that already is mature, high quality. We feel we're partners, and we may have differences as the best of friends. But we can achieve a lot more, I think, and that would not be conditioned by any means by what we are doing in Latin America. In fact, my perception is that the U.S. welcomes a more active role of Chile in Latin America. We're a moderating force. We're not going to go on any extremist alternative in the region. We'll try to be a bridge over differences. We feel that that's possible. And we have tried to show that throughout this time. I think that may be important. Now, you have to recognize, though, that the United States is less important for the region than it was. I mean, Abe Lowenthal's thesis of the 1970s of the declining hegemony today is even more so. I wrote an article about 15 years ago where I was Latin America, semicolon, goodbye USA, I said. It was an exaggeration, of course. But what I was trying to say is that Latin America had a lot more options than we used to in the past. Today, Asia-Pacific is a whole new world for us, and we're putting up embassy. We're trying to join with other members of the Pacific Alliance. With Brazil, we're exploring joint embassies and missions in other parts of the world. We have more options. It's a more diverse world, and the United States can do less than what it used to do a few decades ago. I think that's a reality. But we have to continue to recognize that the U.S. continues to be, until China says otherwise, the superpower. And with regard to science technology, I don't see any significant challenge yet. So I think both things are possible. With regard to the Pacific Alliance, all I can say is that we have a very strong commitment. We don't want to dilute the Pacific Alliance. We find that it is a very positive alternative for Chile. It makes it very easy when foreign ministers and ministers of trade can agree. There's little rhetoric that I welcome, because I went to the meeting, and it was very precise. We have working groups. Let's get reports on what we have achieved, according to yellow lights, red lights, and green lights, what we have done well, has been achieved, what hasn't been achieved, yellow and red lights, what we need to work more on. And right now, this meeting will probably go a step forward with regard to visas and work arrangements for young people. That will be, I think, the essence of this meeting. There are other areas that we would like to see advancement. For example, air transportation. But we see the other partners not willing to do that. So sometimes the rhetoric of free trade is up to, my interests are involved. And since Chile is down there, probably the other ones that are on the way are less willing to have open skies. So that we haven't been able to do anything on air transportation within the Pacific Alliance. With regard to the integration of capital markets, which was another idea, I don't know whether that will fly or not. By the way, I said to my colleagues, it looks like the air transportation idea is not flying, and it is definitely not flying. But I don't think the capital markets integration is either. So we'll see what's possible. We've seen good advancement, but we should also be very frank about this, because the Pacific Alliance has agreed on 92% liberalization of trade. We are going to see whether we achieve that. That's a very good target. It so happens, though, that in the bilateral relationship between Chile and Brazil, we have 98% liberalization. So where's there more liberalization? It looks like in our relationship with Brazil, where it so happens that Chile has $24.6 billion in investments. $24.6 billion of Chilean investments in Brazil. So, you have to be careful about saying here's where, the big progress is being made on free trade, and on the other side, because we disliked that caricature that some made, mainly in the media, and the media here is fine, though, but the other media, that said, the Pacific Alliance are the efficient free traders. The Atlantic are the inefficient statists. The reality is a lot more complex than that. So, but nevertheless, our commitment to the Pacific Alliance is very, very strong. And with regard to energy, true, this is one of the bottlenecks that we have. Chile, unfortunately, imports 95% of the oil and gas or the energy that we need. The Hidroaicén was not just flooding 2 rivers. It was 5 plants that were going to be constructed, and then after that, the towers of transmission throughout Chile. You could imagine what could that could be. So it was turned down by the ministers because the environmental application was objected to, but. We need to do something to replace those sources. And the President has said that the Ministry of Energy has presented a plan for the next few years that includes going a lot more into renewables, solar, do everything possible, import shale gas, and we are looking at all opportunities. In fact, the United States has suggested to us that maybe they could sell gas to us. And we are, looking at that possibility, but we want to cooperate with a lot more countries to see we have imports of cheaper gas than we have. Ideally, if the world was perfect, we should import gas from our neighbors, from Bolivia, but Bolivia won't sell us the gas. Argentina was intended to sell gas to us, but then it was not able to deliver, even though we built a gas pipeline over the Andes. Peru should sell gas to us, probably. But if not, we built a gasification plant, and we have to import it from Malaysia, from Indonesia, which seems a bit ridiculous when we have neighbors. But that would be a perfect world. So, nevertheless, you're right. This is a major issue, and we're working very hard. And in fact, it's going to be, I would say, a major talking point of the visit of President Bachelet here at the end of the month.
Great. Thank you. Yes, Ronnie McLean here, and then we'll take David. Right here's the microphone.
Good afternoon, Mr. Muñoz. I'm Ronald McLean, Foreign Minister of Bolivia, Foreign Affairs. Well, we had a better times in our relationship before, and I wish we have it again in the future. So energy illustrates a little bit the nature of the relationship in South America, and this is something that we have to overcome, of course. Our relationships are going to be kind of frozen in The Hague for the time being, but I can't resist the temptation to ask you to elaborate. How do you see this post-The Hague? Thank you.
Thank you. David Maris?
Minister Muñoz, you've articulated an excellent position for Chile as a leader, but you've sort of left yourself open a little bit to a charge that Chile might free ride in an era where we're seeing on the economic side, on the political side, even on the security side, dramatic changes. And in fact, your reference to the efforts of the OAS and Ambassador Insulza's inability to move the OAS forward because states weren't willing to go to follow the Secretary General. So I wonder if you could tell us something about how Chile is going to try and not just lead cooperation, but change people's perspectives about how one can cooperate when there is so much diversity out there. I mean, that's the challenge that we're facing today, is not just that there's diversity out there, but how do you cooperate with so much diversity? So how is Chile going to try and lead that path?
Thank you. I've been told that was the last question, because I understand Minister Muñoz is going to have to leave shortly, so why don't we, if you could answer those,
Right,
and then we can.
right. Okay.
Sorry.
Let me begin with the last question. Well, there's a lot of diversity within UNASUR, and there were different positions about what to be done in Venezuela. There were some that felt that we shouldn't do anything. There were others that felt that we should simply do a declaration, and there were others that thought that we should actually do something concrete to contribute. Despite that diversity, we got to an arrangement by which we agreed on being proactive, despite the differences, and we had to find the appropriate language. We were not going to mediate. We're going to not even to facilitate the dialogue, but to accompany, to advise. And sometimes you have to negotiate to find the right language and the right formula that will leave different sides comfortable. So that, I think that we can, despite the differences, agree on basic issues. I gave the example of the post-2015 agenda. I feel that we have different interests from other developing nations. The main issue for Latin America and the Caribbean is not so much poverty, which still is a problem. But after all, about 70 million Latin Americans have stopped being poor because of the different programs that have been implemented. And that has been because labor markets have been very active, and that's the main explanation. Second, because of the conditional cash transfers. And third, because of the demographic boom that has meant that younger people are going into the labor, and women. All of that has meant the diminution of poverty. But the main issue is inequality, and I think that's common to all of the region. So that putting the issue of inequality in the post-2014 15 agenda, I think, would be fundamental. Then there are other issues. Citizen security. This is a main issue that is affecting development in our region. A lot more complicated in other regions of the world. And you can have several items on which, despite the differences on economic policies, on political standings, there are common interests within Latin America. If we don't seize that opportunity to take those points of view to the discussion of the post-2015 agenda, that agenda won't reflect adequately the interests of Latin America. That's what we're saying. On some issues, we may not be able to agree, and that is legitimate. Each will go in his or her own way, and we feel that is legitimate. But we feel that despite the difference, there can be bridges built. I just cannot accept the idea that there are blocs that are antagonistic, or that because there is a government that has a different political idea than mine, I cannot agree with that government on some issues. We have cordial relations with a lot of countries, and we agreed on a lot of issues with countries that we don't share the same perspective at all on human rights, on democracy, or on economic policy. But nevertheless, we find areas of cooperation, and that, I think, the effort should be made towards that end. In the case of the OAS, let me say that I don't think that we could have had better leadership than Jose Miguel Insulza. Frankly, it's just the times are not the appropriate one for the type of leadership that he's provided. This is not for lack of trying or not for lack of leadership, on the contrary. I think that in international organizations, in the end, I've been at the OAS and I've been at the UN. It's no more than the sum on the individual political wills. You cannot do more than what they're willing to do. And they cannot blame it on the Secretary General, not blame it on the organization. You know? So with regard to the question of our former Foreign Minister McLean, with whom we worked many years ago, more years ago than we are ready to recognize, probably. Well, I would like The Hague not to have occurred. Unfortunately, the process could be very long. Could be very long. It all depends on what happens. Chile has not yet made a decision. President Bachelet has not made a decision on objecting to the jurisdiction of the court. And there are a lot of elements here that have to be decided. But in any of the scenarios, this will probably be long, unfortunately, and that will affect the bilateral relationship. But I think independently of that, one can meet and one can discuss issues of transportation, economic integration. President Bachelet, during the first administration, talked about a 13-point agenda. One of them was the maritime aspiration of Bolivia. That is out. That was point number 6 of the 13-point agenda. It's out. It's excluded. But there's 12 points, 12 other issues on which we could advance. Chile is willing to do that. But there's a saying, you need two to tango. You cannot tango alone. So we'll see.
Thank you very, very much, Ms. Muñoz. This has been absolutely terrific. Thank you.